Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started because we have an action-packed, jam-filled day for today. We want to stay on time, so we're going to start. And I want to welcome you to the SWOG Oncology Research Professionals Jeri Noboru Oishi Symposium. For those of you that maybe never had a chance to meet Dr. Oishi and his wife Jeri, they were very strong supporters of boots on the ground, ORPs, nurses, CRAs, coordinators, all these years, and Jeri was herself a research nurse. So this is in honor of them and Dr. Oishi, who passed a few years ago. My name is Connie Shaponik, and it's my honor to lead this group. Today's agenda is posted. It's going to move very fast. It's very full, and we want to make sure that we leave time for lots of things. So I want to just point out a couple of details. There's some announcement slides I'm going to go through really quickly, but these slides and our audio visual will both be posted after the meeting. Our goal is not that you digest every piece of information that we share, but that you have more resources when you go home than when you started with. So to start with, please keep your phones on mute to help with sound quality, especially if you're remotely dialing in. If you're a presenter and it's time to speak, you should be able to unmute yourself. Please do submit your questions during the meeting via the chat icon. We won't have a lot of time for Q&A in this session, but we will be taking those questions into the open forum, which builds on what you're going to hear in the next 3 hours here. We are going to post the presentations, as I mentioned, and although there are no formal CEs for this meeting, please do print a copy of the agenda if you need a record of your attendance, and you can fill in the number of hours that you were here to help meet your requirements for SOCRA and ACRP. You are the ORP committee, which means that we're the boots on the ground serving our patients, our offices, those who need us. And as of the recent membership committee account, there are now 10,099 ORPs rostered with SWOG. So you're not alone. There's lots of us working together trying to serve our constituents. This is our committee. We have a number of subcommittees that work together. These folks have worked really hard, but especially I want to acknowledge Joyce Tall and Deb Bergevin, who are the co-chairs of our education committee, and worked very hard on putting today's events together. Our executive committee is shown here, and again, these are folks that work all throughout the year, and you'll meet a number of them throughout this meeting as well. But you are the real core of this committee, and if you'd like to get more involved with any of our groups, any of our work, there's a link on the website that you can find us at and sign up to get deeply involved. One of the roles that we always need help with is that of the liaison role. And there's a liaison committee meeting this afternoon, but certainly important to give input into design, development, and the beginning of a protocol. There are some current open positions. They're posted here. And there's lots of resources, even more than the last time we saw you in the fall. So we want to just highlight a couple of these here, just so you know what to look for. If you haven't seen the CRA workbench in the recent past, continue to watch that. There's ongoing posting and new developments all the time. And when you get home, if you get a chance to look at this slide more closely, Kara Laubach, our new education lead coordinator, has posted some special notes here for you to notice. There's also a new learning management system that's going to contain a lot of modules that you can use in training yourself, training your staff, helping just keep on top of all the massive changes that are going on in our world. There's also a frequently asked questions webpage, a clinical resources webpage, which has lots of regulatory information and things that are otherwise kind of buried sometimes and hard to find, but please do take a look at all of these. Our goal is to make it easy for you to find what you need and to have those fingertip resources available. We're also really excited that SWOG is working hard to develop more patient-friendly summaries and social media toolkits, and there are 2 specific protocols for which those are available listed here. CTSU has also provided a few slides for reference. If you struggle with where to find things on CTSU, there's even a tutorial about how to use CTSU for finding more stuff on CTSU. So there's some graphic depictions of which tab you want to push and how to find them, but we really appreciate their being here with us during this meeting and sharing as well. Lots of new staff resources. I absolutely can't go without mentioning our Hope Foundation support that we have and how grateful we are to them. They do a fabulous job of making sure that our committee is supported. And I know a number of you, at least 12 of you, are here today because of funding that Hope Foundation provided you to award your travel. So our thanks goes out to them for all that they provide. Please look ahead and mark your calendars for San Francisco in May. That's going to come up really quick. And just a few thoughts as we open today. It's a very full agenda. This is a little bit different meeting. Often we focus on studies and forms and specimens and more the meat and potatoes of our work. But today we're really going to look a little under the hood and all the things that it takes to run a research program. Some of them are finally referred to in the world of regulatory as regulatory, which sounds like a swear word to many people. And if you're a clinical research nurse, you may think, well, why do I need to know that? I hate regulatory. Somebody else should take care of that stuff. But our goal isn't to send everybody back out the door as a guru on every topic under the sun, but to help just show you a lot of the things that are going on that need to go on, ways to find resources to make them happen, so that as you're standing there on a hill, on a mountain, or whatever your valleys and divots are in front of you, realize you're not alone. There's lots of help to be had, and it's just learning what you need to know and how to ask and where to go. So from this meeting, I hope that you take what you need. We're going to bombard you with lots of stuff. Tools, resources, experiences, ideas, enough to blow up your brain. I know it blew up ours while we were working on it. So listen for what you need today, and what you need might be different than the next person. If you go away with just one little thing, nurture it, help it grow, reach out and network, look for the resources, just continue to grow and learn, and give yourself lots of grace and mercy and those around you as well. We're in a changing work environment, a changing research environment. A lot of you are new. Some of you have done this for years, but what your day looks like today doesn't look anything like it did last year or 5 years ago. Maybe you're now doing things you never had to do before. You had teams of people to help you, but you're the lone ranger these days. So just realize that we're in a perpetual state of change. Be kind to yourself and others, and reach out when you need to. SWOG has a wealth of resources, and if there are things you need that you can't find, let us know, and we'll keep working on it. So with that, we're going to get started, and I want to introduce our first panel coordinator and presenter, Anthony Hicks from Cancer Research Consortium of West Michigan.
Morning, everybody. Welcome to Regulatory 101. So Connie said, I'm Anthony Hicks. I'm an operations supervisor for the Cancer Research Consortium of West Michigan. So I want to introduce our other panelists. We have Melina Rodriguez, we have Jennifer Haynes, Sean England, he's remote, and myself. And kind of the structure of today, we're going to introduce ourselves, our programs. We're going to look at the NCTN swim lane. You're going to see where we line up, each of the panelists, and then we have a set of questions that we're going to answer from our perspectives. So I'll go first. Again, my name is Anthony Hicks. I work for an NCOR, Cancer Research Consortium of West Michigan. We have 3 component sites, 13 affiliate sites. We have around 171 active clinical trials right now. Personally, I have 6 years of regulatory and cancer clinical research. And as you can see from my picture, I love to spend my fall weekends muskie fishing. As I mentioned, this is the swim lane diagram here from the NCTN. I reside in the NCOR, as you can see, it's highlighted there in yellow. Some of our other panelists you'll see will be main members and lab sites. Then let's jump into some of the questions. So how do you onboard and train new regulatory coordinators? So at CRCWM, we think our training is pretty intricate and robust. We utilize a regulatory manual, as well as a lot of education, SOPs and standalone procedures to really keep us organized. And we really like to tier our regulatory training. So what I mean by that is we'll get a new regulatory coordinator, get them going on some tasks to really get them going. And then once they really get those down, we'll go to another task, keep adding tasks, keep adding and growing. And we really like to do that over a 6 year timeline, depending on that person's research experience and background. Next question, how does your organization and membership structure impact your onboarding process? We are very lucky at CRCWM because our regulatory team is centrally located at our main site, which is very advantageous because we're all in one location. We have regularly scheduled meetings every Monday morning. And so it's super nice. When you onboard a new coordinator, what tools you use to stay organized? First off, we just have an orientation checklist. But I think what the most important thing is our regularly scheduled meetings to keep us on pace. So we meet with our leadership team and we go through that checklist to see, okay, how are we progressing? How are we doing? And then we look to see, okay, what can we do, next week? What can we do in the next month? And go on from there. When I was onboarded, what was my most helpful tip that I received? I think the most helpful tip that I received is that regulatory is a lot, and to stay organized. It really takes a lot of time to fully wrap your head around all of the regulatory processes. And I didn't come from a clinical research background. I came from preclinical. So I didn't have any oncology or clinical research experience. So reflecting on that first year, it's amazing how much you learn that first year. How do you collect credentials at your institution? So I am very thankful at CRCWM. We have an individual, shout out to Nancy, who collects and onboards credentials all of our research staff and physicians. She is amazing. We couldn't do it without her. Does your institution have SOPs regarding credentialing? Yes, Nancy informed me that we do have credentialing, a lot of SOPs outlining credentialing and training so that all of our NPs, PAs, research nurses, regulatory coordinators can participate in research. What tips and tools do you use to maintain credentials? So we utilize our shared drive to really save all of our information. But I think what's more important is that Microsoft Access database where everything's in there, deadline or dates of everything where we got to keep track of expirations and stuff like that. And then I think what's most important is the onboarding credentialing checklist that Nancy uses to keep us organized. What systems do you have in place to prevent lapses in credentials? So in regards to RCR, she receives 30 and 60-day emails for expiration. So that's very helpful. But we also track all of the things here: medical licenses, GCP, HSP trainings, conflict of interest, dangerous goods, and now ID.me within our Microsoft Access database. And she can run reports. She can monitor that to see when everyone is expiring. How do you organize and maintain essential documents throughout the trial? So since really COVID, we've maintained all of our essential documents through a shared drive electronically, but we also utilize our website and our CTMS credit. Do you have any tips or tools for upkeep of amendments, submission deadlines, required documentation? So our reg team utilizes an Excel worksheet for all of our IRBs. Within each of those IRBs, we have tabs lined out for initials, amendments, CRs, study completions, where it really just keeps us organized. We then can put in formulas to make sure we don't go over our deadlines. Yeah, I think that's. How do you ensure PI oversight of essential documents? So we're really lucky. We have an awesome PI. Shout out to Dr. Yost. We have a regular meeting with her weekly, and whenever we have anything else important to talk to her about, we can reach her at any day of the week. But she reviews all of our broadcasts. She reviews all of our meeting minutes. We have a reoccurring meeting monthly with our whole consortium, where we talk about all of our amendments, all of our action letters, all of our local SAEs, CRs, study completions, and any other admin updates. So we're really lucky to have Dr. Yost and her PI oversight. And then why do you think knowledge about basic regulatory requirements are important to everyone's individual role on the research team? I truly think regulatory is the backbone of clinical research. Whether you're a nurse, CRA, or treating physician, an understanding of regulatory requirements is extremely important and keeps our consortium running and compliant. So that is it for me. Next up, we have Melina.
Good morning, everyone. So first, I want to begin by acknowledging that the land that we are on is the traditional territory of the three fire people, the Aoji Biwe, Odawa, and Bodewadmi. I just want to take a moment to appreciate the indigenous people who care for this land and the First Nation people. All right, my name is Melina. I'm from Fred Hutch Cancer Center. We are a LAPS grant-funded center, one signatory site, which I am housed at. We have 24 affiliate sites, closer now to 114 active clinical trials. 6 years in public health, found out that I didn't want to do the research. Instead, I wanted to support the research, and that's what led me to Fred Hutch. And I love going to concerts and I love embroidering. There's two sides of me. All right, as I said, we are a lead academic participating site for the grant. All right, so onboarding new regulatory coordinators. I definitely take a holistic approach, person by person. I know that everybody learns in different ways, learns at different paces. So for the first month or so, I have them shadow me while they're doing their onboarding, maybe reading SOPs, learning what a DOA is. And that way, during that first month, I'm able to kind of get a sense of where they're going to be at and what their strengths might be. I take advantage of our meetings through Teams. I'm fully remote, by the way. I live in Portland, and as you know, Fred Hutch is in Seattle. I've been remote close for 2 years now. So we do all our training on Teams. And if I'm training somebody, I'm recording it. I'm putting it in a SharePoint drive. I'm making sure that anybody who comes after me is going to have access to that, even if I'm not here, which, Maggie, don't worry, I'm not leaving. Also, Fred Hutch has an amazing LMS portal, so lots of training through there. CRS and CTMS webinars are pretty much monthly, and of course, lots of SOP review. Of course, checklist on checklist on checklist. So our organization and membership structure for onboarding, we have a really great team from our CRS which is clinical research support, their customer service line. We basically are able to send all our credential, like CVs, medical licenses, all of that. We send that to a centralized inbox, and then their team is able to handle and upload those items to Florence, which I'm going to get into a little later. We also, like I said, use a shared inbox and Zendesk, which is a ticketing system for processing people who need to be added to protocol trainings, because you can imagine with 114 protocols across however many sites that we have, we get loads and loads of requests. So really leaning into technology. Like I said, Excel tracker for onboarding new coordinators. Within Teams, I set up channels. So basically, I've set up a channel that is a repository for frequently asked questions, trainings, and in that channel, I'm able to upload and basically post, hey, I'm seeing this question a lot. This is how you're going to answer that email if you see this come through. And that way, it's just not living with me, it's living in a shared space, so that no matter what, there's continuity throughout our team. When I was onboarded, they're like, don't rely on your recall, you're gonna write it down. Take a note, put it in a notebook, tell somebody. I feel like sometimes, especially new graduates out of college, you're like, okay, I'm just gonna learn this for a sec, put it in my brain, take my test, and then forget about it. That's kind of undoing those habits. I mean, that's mean. So I had to change that. So write it down, make sure that you're taking good notes. All right, like I said, credentials at our institution, Florence e-binders, they did not pay me for this but they're amazing. We basically use this e-binder system as a repository for all our credentials. So as long as you're part of the consortium, you can access these documents in Florence. It's protected. It's managed by our e-reg team, Casey Lopez, shout out, she's amazing. And then our institutional credentials are housed in our clinical research resources website in SharePoint. And yes, we do have SOPs regarding credentialing. All right, maintaining credentials. One thing I can't point out enough is creating a shared mailbox. Do not rely on individual emails for continuity of credentialing. By having a centralized inbox, you can make sure that everyone knows to send it there. Any queries, that way it's always monitored. And then you can always look back in, like, say, a year ago or 2 years ago, and there will be a record for you rather than somebody else's inbox. Florence eBinders, we maintain essential documents in there, and then CTMS Encore for maintaining CTEP credentials. All right, so preventing lapses in credentials is something super important because, basically if it lapses, we can't allow them to continue in the research, and that can create a whole slew of problems. So for RHCR management, Maggie So, shout out. She is our program manager for NCTN, and she is just on it. She knows the ins and outs. She knows when people are due for their RCR renewals, and she makes sure that it gets done. Florence allows us to actually put an expiration date on documents. So if a document is slated to expire, we get, or actually CRS customer service will get reminders, and they'll basically follow up with the PI, whoever needs to provide that document. And if there is a lapse, they can communicate that to us, and we can help escalate the issue if needed. And I think that's really helpful because with so many staff, it's bound to happen. There's bound to be an expiration at some point that might get past you. Credentials, like I said, in Florence, lapses are rare, but they are handled by a central office team. All right, essential documents to the trial, CTMS, Florence eBinders, and shared drive. It just depends on what we're doing with them, but primarily CTMS is our main source for asking teams to access their study documents. So keeping up with amendments, submission deadlines. I'm a big believer in project management software in Florence. Project management software allows me to see what my team is currently handling. That way I can, maybe step in, take some stuff off their plate. If I see that they have a lot of stuff coming up, I maybe ask them to, you don't have to attend this meeting if you're feeling pressured. I feel like in regulatory, we're kind of expected to just keep going and, have our checklist, but at some point, a checklist can only do so much. Project management software allows us to make sure that we're meeting those deadlines on time. And if anything, we can find points within our process for improvement. And I have weekly meetings with my team, regulatory team, and then depending on what my regulatory coordinators need, I'll meet with them for either like a coffee break or one-on-ones. PI oversight, CTMS in Florence, pretty simple there. We ask them to always review the documents and provide their acknowledgement. All right, so basic regulatory requirements. I thought about this one for a long time. So I liken it to a game rule book, and we reg coordinators are the referees. This is a very simplified way of saying it, but by understanding the standards, the rules that govern clinical research, which is the game, a study team can collectively take ownership of patient safety, fair play, and quality research, fair outcomes. Super simplified, but I feel like if I was explaining that to somebody in high school, that is what I would say. All right, thank you, everybody.
Good morning. My name is Jennifer Haynes. I am the IRB coordinator and clinical research nurse at Margaret R. Pardee Hospital in Hendersonville, North Carolina. We are an in-course site through Southeast Clinical Oncology Research Consortium out of Winston-Salem. We have one NCI-CRB site. We have no affiliates. I am housed within the research site. We are located in our comprehensive cancer center, which encompasses radiation oncology, breast surgery, general surgery, as well as our medical oncology clinic. We currently have 70 active clinical trials. I have 5 years of regulatory and cancer clinical research experience, and I have 19 years in oncology nursing. A fun fact about me is I have a really good memory for song lyrics and can recall them even if I haven't heard the song in many, many years. I'm not gonna sing for you though, sorry. Like I said, my membership swim lane is I am an NCORE affiliate site, and we fall under SCORE. So how we onboard and train new regulatory coordinators, well, that was a hard thing to answer because I am the only regulatory coordinator at my site. And when I started in the position, I was mentored by the previous person right before she retired. So I had about 3 months of training, and then sought out external resources, and there are currently no plans to expand our department. I am a hybrid position, so I am about 50 to 75% reg, and the rest of the time I spend actually seeing patients as well. Our organization and structure impacts our onboarding process. As I said, no plans to expand, but I'm currently updating our processes so anyone can pick up behind me because it's difficult to just learn it all on your own. When we do hire new research nurses within our department, they spend time sitting in my office, learning all our processes and procedures, so they know all the work that goes into opening, maintaining, closing studies, learning about how we process amendments, why we do those things, and they get very tired of hearing me say, well, this is the steps that go into this is why we do those things. The most important thing that Marcia, my mentor, taught me before she retired was don't ever assume. Always ask, because it's better to ask and learn something new. And change is inevitable, so embrace it, because it's always going to change. How do I collect credentials? I send out email requests for the items, as well as placing notices on their desks, depending on which person I am after. Then I receive the materials via email, scanned, sometimes placed back into my office, since we are all very tight in our center. We have policies and procedures to ensure all the criteria are met. I keep spreadsheets of expiration dates. I check RCR monthly. I also get the 30 and 60-day notices. I utilize my Outlook calendar, which all my co-research nurses can see should, God forbid, I'm ever out. They have access to everything I know. I also have a very large wall calendar hanging in my office because I can be a little old school. It also has all the expiration dates on it. Essential documents for the trial. I am currently working to transition to a more electronic system. When I started, it was all paper, and I mean all paper. I think there are 3 forests in our site, at least. So I am working on decreasing the binders and have worked to scan digital copies of all documents so they are electronically accessible. Still working on breaking the physicians from having to do wet signatures. We have a shared drive that everyone can access, and I utilize ProIRB to keep track of all our studies, expiration dates, amendments, and things like that. I review the CTSU broadcast for keeping track of amendment submission deadlines, required documentations. SCORE also sends out update information bi-weekly, and with any additional updates whenever the the LPOs send out amendment updates, they also forward those on as a backup, just in case by some accident I've deleted something that I shouldn't have. I also check on active protocols when we have a new enrollment to make sure that everything is up to date, from the informed consent to the HIPAAs. I ensure PI oversight of essential documents. We meet once a month, at least, to review status of studies, including opening and closing. Any documents that need immediate assistance are emailed to him or placed in his paper inbox. And then I message him via Epic chat or text to let him know that I need something. If he needs more information, then we will meet during his lunch break. What do I think I need people to know, or why regulatory is important? Regulatory is just so important to the research process. It's key to keeping everyone safe and compliant. The more knowledgeable that all team members are regarding everyone's individual role, the better the team can function. I know that if I understand why something is a certain way, it makes it easier for me to be like, okay, I'll do it that way. So when I go to my teammates and try to explain, no, you can't do that way, you have to, this regulation says that we have to do it this way. It's easier when I can explain the why. And that's what I do and why I do it. Thank you very much.
All right, next up we have Sean. Sean, are you ready?
I am ready. I think I'm the first remote person, maybe, so we'll see how this goes. Okay, so I am Sean England from the University of Kentucky Markey Cancer Center. We are a SWOG main member. We have 5 affiliate sites throughout Kentucky. We have about a little over 300 active trials that are open at the IRB, of which about 90 are actively accruing, and about 30 studies at any given time that are in startup. And we work across 3 IRBs. I have about 18 years of regulatory experience, 11 of which have come at Markey Cancer Center. And I have been collecting records since I was a small child. So next slide. As I said, we are a main SWOG member. And as far as you're good. Next slide. So as far as onboarding new regulatory coordinators, we do have an orientation checklist. It starts out at first sort of a day by day for the first few days, and then goes to more of a week by week to cover all major topics. Thankfully, we have 3 senior regulatory coordinators, myself, Jeff Childs, Stephanie Temple, that we kind of divide and conquer in terms of onboarding new staff. We currently have 10, counting me. So we've had a lot of onboarding and training lately. So having 3 of us really helps. And as far as our membership structure, as I said, we're main members, and our affiliate sites are managed by an external coordinating office or a separate coordinating office, and they handle the onboarding for those sites. But locally, we have a dedicated person, Jeff Childs, that I mentioned. He is sort of our go-to for onboarding for not only regulatory staff, but also even for faculty and other members. Next. So when onboarding, we rely pretty heavily on our checklist and some trackers we have to make sure we're hitting key points. And then we also have regular check-ins with the new hire to ensure that we're hitting our targets, to ensure that we're answering questions as we go. And when I was onboarded, probably some of the most helpful things I was told was, number one, of course, we all know, don't assume anything. If you're not sure, check. And if you're not sure the other person's sure, check. And also, if it wasn't documented, it didn't happen. You know, your best intentions are not auditable, but your records are. So you will help yourself and auditors later when you document what you did or didn't do and why you did or didn't do it. And lastly, double check everything we do. We like to sort of use multiple methods. So I may use an encore report and compare it to one of our trackers on a regular basis to ensure they both are jiving. And if they don't, then that may indicate that we need to look into something. Next. As far as collecting credentials, we do a lot of that through email. At UK, we have a Tableau server, which helps us track city credentials, HSP, GSP, et cetera. Also, we utilize the C-Tissue registration credentialing repositories and, of course, state licensure websites just to grab those licenses, often a lot faster than requesting them from the people. And as far as the SOPs, we do have some pretty robust working instructions for the credentialing. And then a while back, we developed a separate investigator guide that so when we're alerted that a new faculty member has been hired, we meet with them, we provide them with this 1 to 2 pager that gives them sort of the basic things they need to do to help us help them get on trials as soon as possible. Next slide. So to maintain credentials, we utilize Encore and Excel. Jeff is sort of our go-to person for credentialing matters, and he does an excellent job of proactively utilizing his trackers to keep people registered and renewed. And then as a group, we store all of our licenses, CVs, et cetera, in a shared drive so we can all access. And so that way, if one person gets a document, we can all have access to it. And as far as preventing lapses, we do rely pretty heavily on the C-Tissue automated reminders. Jeff watches those. He also has some templated emails that he utilizes as we get closer and closer to labs to reach out to investigators. He on the one hand will escalate to leadership to alert them if it's looking to be close to the wire. But on the flip side, he also reaches out individually, maybe texting an investigator, do we need to meet so I can walk you through how to do your part? So we kind of approach it from both sides. And like I said, Jeff has some pretty good trackers that he uses to keep on task. Next slide, please. As far as essential documents go, we rely heavily on Encore, our CTMS, for the distribution of documents to our reg team. We still are primarily a paper-driven institution. We would love an e-reg system, but aren't there yet. So we still utilize hard copies for shadow charts, reg binders, et cetera. We do utilize a shared drive for some central documents like lab normals, med licenses, CVs, et cetera. And of course, some ancillary groups like our investigational drug service house records at their shop during the trial. And then as far as keeping up with amendments, we have a weekly regulatory meeting where we review CTSU postings since last meeting. I find it's helpful, especially when you have a lot of new staff, to not only call attention to a posting, but also say, do you know what this means to the trial? Do you understand how to process this, who to communicate to? And that's been pretty helpful. We've done that the last year, and it's, I think, helped our compliance quite a bit to make sure things are seen. Also, we compare that with the CR tracker to ensure CRs are in on time. And then each reg person maintains their own trackers for amendments that I can go in periodically and check to ensure we're processing within 30 days, et cetera. Next. Ensuring PI oversight. For that, we have disease team meetings once a month. So each site has its own meeting where we can bring updates, discuss things with investigators since they're a captive audience. We utilize some team emails that are templated out so that we can hit all the main points that we need to do. For instance, if there's a reconsent opportunity, we'll make note of that. And if there's a discussion, we'll have that. And then we do smaller team meetings that are more targeted as needed to ensure that we're addressing any issues relating to the ongoing management of the trial. And then as far as the, why basic regulatory requirements, I tried really hard to give a comprehensive answer here. I think in general, I just think of if it's a well-ran trial, that only improves, having strong compliance, ultimately, I think leads to better data. Better data leads to better science and more advancement of the science and ultimately treatment, which benefits the patients, which is what we're all here for. So that was my way to funnel that. And I think that is my last slide. Is that right? There we go. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, panelists, for volunteering to do this. It's Very nice, I appreciate it. Some closing remarks. Please join us to continue the conversation with Oishi. Oishi panelists at the Open Forum Regulatory 101 breakout session number 1 at 12:30. Thank you, guys.
Our next presenter is Matt Boron. We're really glad that he's here with us. He was here with us last night at Site Operations, and we're going to continue that discussion into Oishi, followed by Open Forum. For those of you that don't know Matt, he's the senior clinical research pharmacist for the Pharmaceutical Management Branch for NCI and the world beyond, and keeps saving us from doom on a regular basis. So Matt, welcome back, and thank you for your wisdom.
Just the clicker here. Okay, all right. Well, thanks for having me. It's interesting to hear the discussions of the first panelists, and it helps me put into perspective where what we do in the PMB intersect with what you guys do in the field, ultimately trying to keep patients safe while we're advancing treatment. So it's interesting to hear you in the native atmosphere. So I appreciate what you guys do. What does the PMB do? This stands for the Pharmaceutical Management Branch. Obviously, we deal with pharmaceuticals, we deal with the IND agents, we ship them to the clinical trial sites, and that's our base function. One of the other things we do, and I think we all kind of learn in research, that we look around one day and we're like, well, how did we get here? We do person registration, so we keep track of everybody that's involved in the clinical research and the study teams at the site level. And I'll describe how we do that within PMB. And right now we have about 70,000 people that we register in our systems and maintain on an annual basis. We do site code management, and we have a treatment referral center, which can refer people to trials, refer people to off protocol access mechanisms, those kinds of things. I won't really touch on that. It's not really applicable here, but that's another thing that we do. Some of you may be familiar with this diagram. This is a diagram of the CTEP core systems. So this is the IT infrastructure that we have at CTEP. The first part where we fit in as PMB is the information security. We're kind of responsible for we'll call it the firewall to the system. And that's where you register in IAM. And the new ID.me requirement is part of that ring. Moving in, we'll talk about Aurora a little bit later. That's our inventory management system. Persons and organizations, that goes into the IAM and where you are and what you're doing. And then we get into the RCR and delegation of task log profiles. So that's kind of where we fit in to the regulatory puzzle of the NCI and how we get to make sure that the data we get is solid. So for person registration, that's through the Identity and Access Management System, or IAM. And that's where you come into the system as everyone comes in there first as a new research team member. Most of us will come in as an associate investigators. Physicians come in as investigators and they go down a little bit of different path, but they get to the same place. This is also, the IAM is also where the ID.me implementation has been inserted, and that works with identity verification, so making sure you're a unique individual, and also the two-factor authentication, similar to when you sign into your bank, you get a code that you have to put in the system. Now, I know Joyce is going to talk about this a little later, so I'm not going to really get too much into this, but it is a federal requirement. The NIST guideline is here. We started in July of 2022, and full implementation of the system requirement is going to be July 1st, 2023. So if you haven't set your ID.me account up by then, you'll be locked out of the system. This is a workflow. I won't go through this. That's in the other slides. So once you become an entity in the IAM system, you go down the path of, depending on what your role is at your site, you may go into the Registration and Credential Repository, or RCR. This is the electronic system that we use to track all of the documentation and credentials for people participating in our trials. And you would get assigned a registration type of an investigator, an IBR, non-physician investigator, which is an advanced practice provider. And that's at the level where you have advanced training, you have an advanced degree, and recently the rule has been put in place that NPIBRs are able to write for clinical trial agents. So that's a change for us, and it sounds like it's pretty well received from the sites. And then kind of the AP level, Associate Plus, is kind of everybody else that's part of the team that's important to identify as contributors. And through RCR, most of you probably have some experience with RCR, but depending on what your registration type is, you may have to submit a 1572. Everyone has to submit a biosketch, and this is where we collect our financial disclosures. If you are a physician investigator, you will have a shipping address if you're going to be receiving drugs, and this is where you'll do that too. Site code management, that's something done through our enterprise core module, and that's assigning a CTEP site code. You'll hear that term a lot when you're talking about your site specifically. But it's used to identify as a unique identifier for any research locations where clinical trial conduct is being applied, primary offices and practice sites. We do assign them to drug company codes, and that links into the financial disclosure section of the RCR. And then, of course, we need to know where you want to get your drug shipped. And that's all through the enterprise core module. So kind of putting all these pieces together, why do we collect all this information? Why is it important? Collecting I'll call it IAM and RCR, the library of people. This library of people allows the sites and the NCTN groups, ETCN labs, to build their study teams from this library. So they can look and the credentials are available in the system, and they can build the rosters from there. And then, of course, everybody's favorite, the delegation of task log. That is where you pull the people from in RCR to populate that log. So the delegation of task log. So I'm covering a lot of different areas. This is kind of all the things that PMB touches on and how we contribute from our side. So the delegation of task log serves really two main functions. It's documenting the study team, so who's participating at the site level, and that's really kind of the section 6 on a 1572, if any of you are familiar with that. And then it also allows the delegation of tasks, as it says, to a particular team member. So what can that team member do at a particular location? And when we have all this information, the IAM, RCR, the delegation of rosters, and the delegation of task log complete, we have the ability to print a site-specific protocol packet for the FDA. So if a site is getting inspected by the FDA, or if an auditor is looking for regulatory information as far as registration, you can come to us, we'll print out this packet, and it will essentially be a site-specific, protocol-specific package that would be submitted to the FDA during a submission of an application. So for those of you that aren't familiar with it, we have 12 basic tasks that comprise the DTL. Those we have about 26 or 28 tasks now that are optional to select, but we have 12 basic tasks that are required on all of them. So usually people just select those 12 and move on. These delegation of task logs should list anyone that is considered a significant contributor to the study, and that's defined in the guidance on 1572s that the FDA has. If you want to check that out, I have a reference to that on the slides here. And then it's signed by the clinical investigator, essentially attesting that the investigator knows who's participating and how they're participating. We released the delegation of task log in 2018, and since the release, we've had a number of enhancements thanks to the site advisory panels that we work with. We've established a task assignment browser, so if you're looking for, on a Friday and the normal person that does the consenting isn't there, you can find that person, you can find a task assignment at your site that a person is assigned to consenting. You can pull them in. If you have this is certainly relevant today with all the turnover that we're having, you can bulk add or bulk delete people and tasks from delegation logs. We get a number of sites that have tens of or hundreds of delegation logs, and this makes it easier along those lines. And then I mentioned that the CIs have to sign all of the delegation logs. We've simplified the signing procedure for the investigators, and that seems to be working well. And then we are looking at future working groups to develop an overall task to develop a universal DTL. Agent management is the next part of what we do. That's all kind of things that you can assume we'd normally do as the pharmacy group. Agent ordering, distribution. We handle the documents that you might need to access IBs, stock recovery letters, those kinds of things. And then our new baby, I guess, we're about to launch in January. We have a date now, January 6th. We're going to launch Aurora, which is our inventory management system. It's going to be a system that's replacing 20-year-old technology, and we're hoping to ease things on our side and ease things on your side as far as what you have to document on paper and how that happens and where you store information. And some of these regulatory binders with pharmacy logs, you're going to be able to get rid of because it'll be all in the application itself. So the first part of what we're doing is replacing OEOP, which some of you are maybe familiar with. Ordering, you might be an ordering designee for your site, and your order drugs obtain investigator brochures through OEOP. That is going to be replaced as the first phase in January. We're enhancements across the system for agent ordering and documentation. We're going to open it up for multiple shipping addresses per investigator. That's something we've been trying to aim for quite a while. And then with that, because we're going to link with Open and the registrations directly, you may be familiar with us giving you calls and saying, hey, we're not going to send you drug until you have a patient enrolled. We link directly with Open, so we'll be able to see that. We won't have to bother you guys with that information, those phone calls. First, this is a big change for sites that are conducting blinded studies. Because we are going to have that direct link with Open, we're now going to have the sites submit their first orders through Aurora, which is different. So if you know that you're enrolling patients to the blinded studies, make sure you remember that. We'll have the ability to have you manage primary shipping designees. So if you're setting up addresses for your site, the person would be doing that. Then we have the ability to directly communicate with PMB through a dialogue function. And then the big thing is the electronic drug accountability form. That's going to launch probably 2 months after we launch in January, the ordering section, and then probably 6 months after that. So later next year, the EDARF will be mandatory. I just pulled this up as a example screen of what Aurora would look like for someone who's an ordering designee. You'd be able to see your orders, track them. All of the local destructions and the transfers can be conducted within the system, so no more paper back and forth. EDARFs will be listed there, and then if you're a PSD, you have shipping address changes. And up at the top in the dark bar there, that's kind of the overall navigation, so orders, accountability, document access, PSD. So we have an Aurora page on the CTEP PMB webpage. We have presentations, we have a list of FAQs. We have training videos very similar to what we did for our old agent management system. So feel free to sign up for those. Those are all take on your own self-guided tours of Aurora. Embedded within Aurora, you're going to have access to the help button on every screen. It'll tell you what's happening on that screen and how you can do what you need to do there. And then the dialogue button, and always you have PMB after hours. So This is going to be a major undertaking for us and for the site. So we ask patience from everybody and hold on. And like they said earlier, change is inevitable. Embrace it. So thanks for the opportunity to talk, and feel free to show up to the session and ask questions.
Next, we'd like to welcome our Know Your IRB presenters and panel, led by Joyce Tall, who is our education co-chair, and we're grateful for all the work that they've been putting in. More pearls of wisdom to come. Thank you all.
Good morning. So before we get started, there's a housekeeping item I want to make sure that I mention. When you walked in the door, you were handed an evaluation form. Please, when you are done with the end of the morning session, fill that out and leave it on either one of the two back tables. To understand why that's so important is to understand why we chose this topic today. And as I was sitting and listening to all of the presentations, and we have now arrived at Know Your IRB, which is a little bit of an overview about what an IRB does and the different ones that we work with. It dawned on me that maybe it would be good to pause for a second and understand a couple of things. First of all, in that first presentation, you truly got a feel for the wide variety of sites as well as people who work in this arena. Okay. Know that this topic was chosen because it appeared on last year's evaluation forms. And people said unanimously, we really need to know more about regulatory. Just so you know, I'm not a regulatory person at all. I'm a nurse. I've been a nurse for a long time. And I like taking care of patients. And I can remember for the first 2 years of doing this, I kind of thought, oh, you know, those people over there, they'll just take care of it. And I don't have to think about it, right? And then one day we got short and I said, oh, I can do an IRB submission. Ha, 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 ha. It was an ugly moment. And so I learned how precious these people are to us. I also tied that together in my mind with something that you all should remember. Winston Churchill said, the farther back you look, the farther ahead you see. And so these people are historians as well as our archivists. They tell us everything that happened in the trial. They tell us whether we did it completely or not, right? Our lovely deviations. And they help keep that history so that anyone who walks in the door can understand everything that everyone in this room has done to get great care, safe care, and great data for our studies. And so it's really important to understand that. In the second one with Matt, you got a great overview of the PMB. And again, that's tremendously important. You know, we use so many acronyms in this industry, it's frightening sometimes. And for a long time, I wasn't exactly sure what PMB was. And then somebody said to me, oh, those are the folks with the illegal drug over there. You know, and if you've ever dealt with an FDA inspector, that's exactly what it is until it's been approved. So these people are incredibly important to us. So the other thing you're watching today is a lot of people. And as Connie said in the beginning of this, SWOG is all about all of you. We are the oncology research professionals. And so this is a bit of old-fashioned recruitment, right? We all know that there are a lot of new people involved in SWOG. They bring a lot of phenomenal thought and ideas with them. And so this is one of our efforts to get a lot of new people involved and help infuse all of our committees with that lifeblood of continuing great thought. So today I have the pleasure of inviting two guests. They will be with us remotely. Laura Covington and Jacqueline Steenbacher, or Jackie, are our representatives from the CIRB. And as we all know, boy, we live with the NCIRB and ETCIRB a lot. So these folks are tremendously important. From the University of Kentucky, I am so thrilled to have Tasha Courtney, Sean England, who you've already heard from, and Stephanie Temple. From UC Davis, my home, I brought with me Ashley Tyden, and Mary Gay Lepisarin is remote in the beautiful city of Sacramento. Ever want to come visit and work there, just let me know. And then we have Maggie So and Melina Rodriguez from Fred Hutch. Amy and I have been facilitators, colleagues, constituents, consultants, et cetera, on this. And so we all have a set of slides. They're going to talk to you each individually about the site they work at. They're answering 3 separate questions about this. And please know from all of our presentations this morning, one of our main goals was to crosswalk a morning learning with an afternoon set of participation and questions. So this afternoon at Open Forum, if this isn't your area of expertise, phone a friend from home and say, hey, you got any questions? Because I've got the people who have the experience and the knowledge that you need, and I can connect you. And that is, after all, one of the greatest things that we do as oncology research professionals, is connect people to a successful trial, right? So I'm going to start, hopefully, if we advance. I wanted you to know a couple things that I learned along the way. First of all, this is a team sport, and you've heard somebody else use that, and I use that all the time. This is not an isolated thing. It takes a village to get this done. Different people come together and work to resolve and get us toward compliant and safe research. That's our goal. These are the folks that review the human subject biomedical research that you are operationalizing. They're watching over this to make sure that everything is prepared, this IRB, this kind of nameless, faceless group of people out there. It's important to understand that their activities encompass a lot of that heading of human subject research is a very broad one. And please know, in case you doubted for a moment, regulatory work touches each and every one of us. And so knowing the basics of this is incredibly important. So I'm going to kick off with, and I'm going to see if we can cue Laura and Jackie. Are you on the line?
I am.
Welcome.
Laura.
Welcome, and thank you. So if you'll tell them when you'd like your slides advanced, these
Okay.
are their set of slides.
Great. So just a little bit of history on the CIRB, since all of you are using us. The idea for it came in 1997 with the Armitage report. The first review was conducted by the adult CIRB, now called the adult CIRB late phase emphasis, in January of 2001. So we're hitting the 22nd anniversary soon. The PED CIRB launched in 2004. We received our first accreditation in 2012, the next one in 2015, one in 2020, and the next one's due in 2025 for AHARP. In 2013, the early phase emphasis launched, and in 2015, the cancer prevention and control that reviews the NCORE studies launched. Next slide. So just to give you an idea, it's the authorization agreement that delineates what each group does, what we do at the CIRB, and what your institutions do. The CIRB is responsible for initial, continuing, and amendment review, the local context for enrolled institutions, the review of potential unanticipated problems and serious or continuing noncompliance, both trial-wide and locally occurring. And we also review studies that have a participant who is enrolled who becomes incarcerated while on study. So none of the studies are approved to enroll prisoners from the start, but this is if somebody should become incarcerated while they're on study and that the site feels that they should continue on study, then that's something that the CIRB would review. The institutions, as you've been talking about, are responsible for the oversight of the research at the enrolled institution. So that's what that regulatory does. They make sure that everything's happening the way it's supposed to, as well as having adequate staff and resources available. The identification and reporting of those locally occurring unanticipated problems and serious or continuing noncompliance, because unfortunately we don't have auditing funds. So we trust you to tell us what we need to know so that we can make those determinations, and the institution's responsible for HIPAA. Next slide. So local context considerations are focused really on anything at the population of your institution that has unique requirements. So it's basically looking at things in the context of your institution for this research? And what is it that's special at your institution versus an institution in another region of the country, urban, suburban, rural, those types of considerations that are specific to your institution and that location. Investigator resources, which, as you know, is very important in making sure that they're qualified and that documentation is maintained. And then the confirmation that boilerplate language for the consent form complies with the federal regulations as well as the CRB requirements. And these are established through the annual worksheets, the signatory institution worksheet and the principal investigator worksheet. Next slide. So this is an overview of the review. So the CRB review is what happens with the study at the central level, the trial-wide level. So the study chair submits that study. PIO issues an approval on hold. So this is for initial review and amendments. And the CRB conducts that initial review. NCI issues the final approval, and then it's available for distribution for the study to be opened. Then comes local context review, and the PI submits their study-specific worksheet to the CIRB. The CRB conducts that local context review, and then the PI receives CRB approval to open the study. This, of course, is not necessarily saying that you can enroll a participant the next day. There's a lot more that has to be done at an institution to make sure that you're ready to start enrolling in a trial, but at least you have your IRB checkbox done. Next slide. So we have recently updated the CRB website. As you can see, we refreshed it. We tried to make it more responsive to the types of questions we were getting and easier to find things for the sites. Next slide. One of the things that we did was add a For New Users tab. So this is where you go if you're new. And I know that there's turnover, so there are a lot of people who are new to all of this. And this is where we direct new users to get started, just to get an overview of what's happening with the CRB, helpful hints. And if you go to the next slide. Also this, which I find very helpful. And if there's anybody who has feedback on what would be a good revision to it, that would be great based on your use of it. But it's really telling you what you'll find at the CRB website versus the CTSU website versus IRB Manager. Because when you're new, they all sort of merge together. And we had a lot of people just not sure where to go. So hopefully this is a helpful resource to new people to have an idea of what is done and how to use these three websites. Next slide.
Laura and Jackie, thanks very much, much appreciated. As you know, they will be present in open forum in the afternoon and happy to answer questions specifically about the NCI-CRB, which deals with the vast majority of our studies, if not all of them. We also wanted to cover two other IRBs, though, that you may work with for a variety of reasons, depending on the type of studies that your site runs. We all deal with local IRBs. In some manner, that happened much more in the past, and when the transition was made to the NCI-CIRB, we ended up dealing with them as our IRB of record much more. But there are some legacy studies. And I think it's really important to understand that if you've worked with one local IRB, you've worked with one local IRB. They're all very different. Their perspective and their view is different because it is representative of the local context. And local context, in my jargon, actually just means it's the people in the population in the catchment area and the service that goes to your population of folks that you provide research services to. So there is a wide spectrum. It's important to understand how your local IRB interacts with the NCI-CRB and how that affects the conduct of research. Different IRBs still require a interesting wide variety of how much they need to know about what the CIRB is doing as the seated IRB of record. It's important to understand your institutional compliance policies and how they intersect. It's also important to have a goal of developing an ongoing relationship. Every IRB is different, as I said. I will say that over and over again. And so developing a relationship with them and understanding how they like to see things, the language they like to use, the model consent forms that are local, your templated consent forms, all very, very important. And again, peculiarities and proclivities is the best way I can say it. Some of you may work with commercial IRBs. There are a variety of them: WCG, Advara, Brainy, Sterling. They're often done with industrial studies. And the reason we included this slide is sort of as a preface to the fact that, you know, if you're not dealing with them now, you're going to be dealing with them likely into the future if you continue to do SWOG studies that involve commercial sponsors. If you work with NSABP Foundation, if we work with a crew, if you work with any of the other groups that have those industrial arms. And so it's important to understand that those will grace your landscape, and they're different, okay? Every one of the IRBs is slightly different. A meet and greet with setting expectations, policy awareness, the differences between each of the IRBs, the timing schedule, when amendments have to be processed, all of those are incredibly important. And an initial, like I said, meet and greet when you start working with a new IRB is incredibly helpful, just to make sure that all the cards are on the table and everybody comes, you know, level sets, reads from the same songbook, you know, understands and is on the same page. So now we've asked each of the presenters to tell you a little bit about themselves, and they'll ask for the slide to be advanced to the next person. This is their background. Oops, not quite yet. We'll go back to Laura, and she'll start off. Thank you. Laura is so well-versed, as is Jackie, so I'm going to hand the baton over to you, Laura, to start this first slide introducing yourself.
Great. Thank you, Joyce. I am from the MS company that holds the contract to support the NCI-CIRB. We manage 842, give or take, studies for the NCT and ETC and NCORE, as well as some of the smaller groups. I have 16 years of experience with the CIRB, 20 years of IRB experience, and 25 years of regulatory experience. I started out with FDA submissions when I started with MS 25 years ago. So contact information, you can get to me through the help desk, ncicrbcontact@ms.com, or the phone number. And if you just address it to me, it will get to me, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. So my fun fact is that I've always driven two-door red cars, and my current car is my dream car. They did a 50-year anniversary of the Fiat Spider, so that is my dream, and I love it every day. Next slide. So Jackie is in the middle of an LPE meeting right now, but she will join us this afternoon for the open forum. She's been with the MS Corporation for 9 years, and she has 21 years of IRB experience and works with the early phase and late phase adult boards. She's extremely disappointed she can't be in Chicago. She is a diehard Chicago Cubs fan and loves the city. Next slide. So tips, tricks, and quirks and nuances that we've learned. It's really that we're trying to help you understand what you need to do to get things to the CIRB. It's a lot, and it's complicated, and it changes. Unfortunately, it changes, it seems, every day. But we have that website up there as a place to get general information, and we do try to give helpful hints and tricks on the website. And as always, you can contact our help desk and reach out for assistance with any questions you have. Next slide. So during the pandemic, we learned that everybody can work remotely in our office, so that we are all remote right now. Remote consent was a big thing, and that was something that took us by surprise in the beginning, but I think we finally got it, or getting there to get it worked out. So it was implemented. Now, in the beginning of this month, we removed the requirement for a witness for the remote consent based on NCI's direction. So that's one progression that we've had. And we are working on making policies that will continue after the pandemic for remote consent. But for now, any of those pandemic policies are still in place. Next slide. And to establish that relationship with you. Sites have an assigned local context coordinator to help them with their submissions to the CIRB. So what we're trying to do is give you that contact. The help desk is also available for sending queries to specific people within the operations office. So if you're trying to get in touch with your local context coordinator, you can do that through the help desk. We're trying to provide as much communication and information as we can to the sites. And our goal really is to try to make the IRB process easier for your site and for you. Sometimes we succeed and sometimes it takes a minute to get there, but that's our goal. And that's what we're trying to do for you to help you get this research done. I think that's all we have. Next
Thanks
slide.
again. Thanks,
Thank
Laura,
you.
so very much. So now, let's see. There. Sean is remote, and Sean spoke earlier. Sean, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So for the folks that were on a little bit earlier, you get to hear this again. So I am Sean England from University of Kentucky Markey Cancer Center. We're a SWOG main member. We work on a range of NCI cooperative group, foundation, industry, and investigator-initiated trials. We have a little over 300 active trials at various IRBs. We're primarily UKRB, quite a bit of SERB, and I think 2 WERB studies currently. I've been doing regulatory for about 18 years, 11 of these at Markey Cancer Center, and the last 6 or so as lead of the regulatory team. And I've been collecting lots of dusty records for many, many years. Next slide. And so as far as tips, tricks, and quirks while completing regulatory, I think the main thing was sort of learning as much as I can about our electronic database, which is Encore. We put so much information and spend so much time on the care and feeding of that system that having the discipline to put information into it and the creativity to get information out of it sometimes are really key. And if you have a CTMS, learning about its various reporting features and just learning how different parts of that system work with itself is really, I think, important for management and for keeping reporting consistent to your RBs, for instance. Like we do demographics reports, et cetera, each year, and you want that to be consistent and have continuity. Also, just in general, is the thing about learning who does what and when we were training new people, there's a lot, one of the big things we key on is learning essentially who does what, and that helps us manage things because we know who needs a piece of communication and maybe who doesn't, so we can kind of streamline our communications on that front. And lastly, especially during COVID, we sort of broadened the array of communication methods, especially with our investigators. I have more investigator cell phone numbers now than at any time in my life. So between that and the emergence of Teams, at least for us, is a really big technology that we're really embracing, both as a Teams page, as having a central chat for all reg members during the days, so we can have a sort of this ongoing discussion about things. All of those things have really been impactful in how we do our work, especially when now that we're hybrid. We've been hybrid for quite a while. So next slide. And so as I sort of alluded to previously, adapting our processes to remote work, in March 2020, we pretty much went 100% remote for quite a while. And it was sort of later that we started trickling back on site. And now we're truly, I think, a hybrid, half on, half off type of situation. And so we certainly broadened how we communicate. Teams, like I said, has been a big thing. We all went from doing Zoom some to doing Zoom a lot for various meetings. Our IRB meetings, for instance, are on Zoom these days, where that was not the case before. And we do a lot of text and other alternate communications that we didn't do previously. And we also, the Cancer Center did a collaborative study with infectious disease. So we had a really big adventure trying to learn how to consent COVID patients in the middle of 2020, when we really didn't know how to do such things. And so we had to learn and work with our RB to adapt some things for that. We've broadened our use of electronic signatures like Adobe eSign, and become fluent with that, and broadened our license for that technology. And then we also did our first remote audits. We learned how to prepare by some of us going on site, scanning things, using the electronic documentation we already had to provide auditors with the documentation they needed to conduct their audits. So those were huge new things during the pandemic. Next slide. So in terms of working with RRBs, I think, being proactive is really key. If I'm working on something that's not super typical, I will go ahead and just pick up the phone and say, here's how I'm approaching this, and just sort of bounce it off of the IRB member, whether it's someone at SERB or someone at UKRB, and sort of getting their take. And a lot of times that will save a lot of us a lot of back and forth. I've learned a lot from doing that. And so I encourage folks to sort of be proactive and sort of ask the question first. A little bit of guidance up front saves you a lot of revisions back and forth. And lastly, but not leastly on that, is recognition. I try to show recognition and appreciation for IRB, local and otherwise. And now's a good time. SERB has been great. My entire career, SERB has been a very reliable source of information and great for other guidance and occasional reminders even. And our UKRB is just outstanding. We work with them day in, day out, and we couldn't really do this without them. Next slide.
Thanks so much,
Thanks.
Sean.
Thank you.
We're going to hand the baton over to Ashley Tyden, who I brought with me from Sacramento. And Ashley will tell you about herself. Just a delightful colleague that works a lot with our community sites. UC Davis recognizing that in Northern California, we have a very large catchment area, and that it is very important for us to have community affiliates that are robust and very much considered in getting research to everybody.
Thank you so much, Joyce. Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley Tyden. I'm the Clinical Research Director for our Cancer Care Network. As Joyce mentioned, we have a very large catchment area, so UC Davis partners closely with community oncology practices so that we can help them provide really high-quality care and also bring clinical research to patients closer to their homes. It's a mission I'm really proud of and honored to be a part of. I worked over the course of my career with all types of IRBs and all types of trials. I've been in cancer clinical research for 15 years. I started as a clinical research coordinator at UC San Diego with the GynOnc team, and it's been a career that I just kind of fell into, and I think that's how a lot of us are, and really happy to be here. I'm an old home enthusiast, so being here in Chicago has been really cool. The architecture is stunning, and I hope we all get time to get outside and go for a walk. Next slide. And then I'm joined by my colleague Gay as Senior Regulatory Coordinator at UC Davis. She primarily manages investigator-initiated and industry-sponsored trials, so she has a wealth of experience with our local IRB and commercial IRBs. She'll be joining us later at the open forum in case anybody has any questions and wants to pick her expert brain. Next slide. Okay, tips and tricks. So one of the most important things I've learned is to develop SOPs, guidelines, and checklists. I know you all have probably heard this a lot, but they are so important and helpful in making sure that we are all operating in a consistent fashion. It's important to strike a balance, I think, between allowing all of us to operate with our individuality and our unique work styles, but still making sure that our end product has uniformity and that we all can find what each other are doing. I also would say just don't be scared about standard operating procedures. They don't have to be super formal, especially not at first. They can be something really simple, a Word document where you jot down your process, and a really great starting off point for developing something more formal in the future. Another really important tip is to standardize your naming convention of all your documents. Having your shared drive perfectly organized makes it so much easier to be able to find your documents. And then developing communication plans tailored to your unique research teams. I really think it's really important to communicate with people where the work is being done. So Rachel Kitchen, who you'll hear from later, is the Senior Regulatory Coordinator for the Cancer Care Network, attends all of our research team meetings with our specific disease teams, and she's a vital member. She presents all of the amendments, memos, regulatory updates directly to coordinators, so they get that face-to-face interaction with her. We don't simply rely on email. I think everyone is so busy and emails are so easy to be missed. So having her truly present at all of our meetings is so important. And finally, just to stay really flexible. we don't operate in black and white. It's our job to take these regulations and apply them to real world scenarios. So we really have to stay flexible. Next slide. Okay, I think all of us have said this already during this meeting, but the pandemic really forced this conversation forward about us being open to really leveraging the technology available to us. I'm so proud of our leaders and the NCI for being so open and progressive. At a previous institution, we always wanted to allow people to work from home, but it was sort of a non-starter. We knew we wouldn't really have the buy-in from our leadership to be able to allow us to do that. So the pandemic opened those doors, and that's one thing I'm really grateful for. Next slide. Okay, so talking with your IRB, I think this is so important. We established routine standing meetings with our IRB director so that we could open up this really great two-way communication street with them. I think oftentimes our cancer center clinical trials offices are the big man on campus. We often own the biggest component of the research portfolio. So we're their largest end users, we're their biggest customers. And so we don't always realize this voice that we can have where we can help them understand our operations, and it may drive forward process improvements or updates to their policies. An example that I have at a previous IRB I worked with is they required everybody who worked on the study to be added to the RPL and be approved by the IRB, including coordinators, data coordinators, everybody. And once they understood our robust delegation of authority log process and the oversight that we had over who was working on the studies, they revised that policy. So they only required the investigators to be approved by the IRB, which made just operations a million times more efficient for us. So I would just really encourage everybody, if you haven't already, to set up a standing meeting. Next slide. That's it, thank you.
And I'm proud to introduce Melina Rodriguez, who's spoken before, represents Fred Hutch, and has a wealth of expertise also. Melina?
Thank you. Yes.
You may.
All right, as she said, my name is Melina Rodriguez. I'm a regulatory at Fred Hutch Cancer Center. We are a LAPS site. We have a full range of studies, but mostly interventional clinical trials. My experience, I have 6 years in public health and oncology research and 2 years in regulatory. All right, I will say that this presentation, I consulted with the person who trained me, Diana Cervantes. She's no longer on NCTN, she's in industry now, but within Fred Hutch, but I just want to shout her out because she was so instrumental in training me. And it was a real joy talking with her about these questions and reflecting on our time together. So some tips and tricks that I've learned while completing regulatory work. It's really important to foster relationships with support staff, admins, managers, CRCs. For me, I like to take the business out of it a little bit because, I mean, talk with these people every week, multiple times a day. And so I just really want to make sure that they know that I appreciate them and that it's an open and safe communication line between us and any of the disease teams. And for me, that's a really important part because I feel like from there, they can be more open to coming to us with issues, non-compliance, questions, all around just a good, safe atmosphere. Also leaning into technology, Florence digital e-signatures, Florence e-binders. As I said, I'm fully remote, so I am not on campus to pick up any wet ink signatures. I really do push the Adobe digital e-signatures or the Florence e-binders. For Microsoft Teams, I use this to streamline updates, house internal training, DOA trackers, NCTN regulatory work guides, tutorials, all of this to just make sure that it's continuous in its availability to our team. And then I also open up just chats and Teams with CRCs, so they always know that they can come and send me a chat rather than a full-length email, and we can take all of that, I guess, expectation out of there and just be real for a second. All right, what did I learn during the pandemic? So I joined Fred Hutch when it was in the middle of the pandemic, so remote consent and telehealth, when we were applying to our local IRB at Fred Hutch to have these approved. What Diana and I found that the devil's in the details. They really want to see clarity on the stage of the consent, reconsent, follow-up, who's being consented, just really, I guess we all have been there where we don't want to be too detailed and box ourselves in, but IRB wants to see the details. So just finding that gentle balance. And then another thought, as I heard our other presenters answer this question, flexibility is so important. Understanding that people are dealing with things that we don't know about. So I guess just being patient, being firm as far as your boundaries are concerned, because ultimately we do have to make sure our research is compliant and quality. So just finding that balance. So to establish a good working relationship with my IRB, I just reach out to them if I have questions or need clarity, especially prior to submission. And I'm always aiming to be quick on my turnaround times when they send me an email, just respecting that they have a lot on their plate as well. And it probably helps them when I answer as soon as possible. Thank you so much.
Thanks to all of our panelists. All of these experts will be available to you to ask questions. These are peers, these are colleagues, and so develop these relationships, incredibly important. I'd like to now hand this off to our next set of speakers. They're going to talk to us about SWOG perspectives and common challenges. And I'd like to welcome to the podium Dana Sparks and Kara Laubach. And Dana is from UC Davis, and Kara is from SWOG Operations. She's our new education coordinator, and we are thrilled to have her speak with us today.
Be a little more relaxed and sit at the computer. I would like to thank you all for being here, and also to provide a little bit of perspective. We've talked a lot about regulatory this morning and how important it is, but having been in research for a very, very long time, probably longer than some of you have been alive, I can remember when a lot of this compliance stuff wasn't in place. And the importance of compliance and regulatory really lies in the idea of the slippery slope. You know, you let somebody get away with one thing, and then they're gonna get away with another thing, and then they're gonna get away with another thing. And pretty soon you're not collecting quality data. So I think having that perspective, when you get frustrated with, you know, do we have to cross every T and dot every I? Can't we have a little bit of flexibility? That's really the importance of compliance and regulation, is that if you allow one thing, there's the danger of allowing many more things, and then everything falls apart. So I think it's critical to think about that perspective. I also think that another thing that's come up in these discussions is that clearly we have so many different practice settings in SWOG. And so the challenge we have at the operations office is we have to try to put things in place that can help you with all of your issues in all of these different practice settings, you know, from the sites that are still working with paper systems, we recognize that, to the sites that have very sophisticated electronic systems. We put one more thing on top of that and they're ending up having to do duplicate work. So we try to balance that out as much as we can. And I think the last thing that that I would like to touch on before we get into the slides is that we have a big push right now for just-in-time activation of studies. And recognizing that you guys are dealing with short staffs and a lot of turnover, and how can we get studies open and deal with opening studies for rare patient populations when we know you may only see one of these patients every 2 years? You know, how can we ensure, if we're ever going to do studies for rare patient populations, the only way they can really be done is in the cooperative group setting. And if we can't persuade sites that, you know, we can find easy ways to open studies when you see those patients, we won't be able to serve those rare patients. So one of our big focuses recently has been trying to collect best practices from the sites who are able to do just-in-time activations. So this really touches heavily on a lot of the regulatory issues that we've been talking about this morning. And we will be pursuing trying to collect that information from the sites who are able to do it so that we can share it with everyone else. So that's just something kind of to look forward to that we're hoping to be able to gather for you. So Kara and I have I think it's a really pleasant responsibility of being able to talk to you a little bit about how the NCI and SWOG work together, and particularly to deal with issues of where those regulatory responsibilities intersect within the NCI system. So there's a lot of information that we're being provided to you here, mainly to give you some resources. So you'll have these slides made available to you. We don't expect to go through all of this in a lot of detail. It's really just to make sure that you have access to this information. But some of the things that it's an important principle that underlies a lot of the structure of the NCI is that we expect the sites to self-regulate. There are certain things that are mandates that come down within the NCI system, but the whole point of cooperative group research is that everyone is responsible for themselves. And so we want to make sure that we give you enough flexibility to allow you to do that, recognizing the practice settings are very different, but also provide enough structure so that you're not floundering out in the wilderness by yourself. And so to provide some guidance, but not so strictly that you can't function. Part of the requirements based in the NIH standards of conduct is related to the acceptance of grant funding. And so if your site, your institution accepts an NIH award, this includes also subcontracts through the cooperative groups. The recipients, as part of the signing off on that award statement, is that they agree to comply with the requirements that are in the NIH grants policy statement, and that with the requirements of the NCI investigator handbook as well, if the grant is coming from the NCI. When we're doing studies under SWOG-held INDs, and this is a little bit different, because not only do the NCI grant award requirements apply to that study because the NCI is the financial sponsor of the study, but also SWOG policies apply because SWOG is the regulatory sponsor of the trial. So we do provide additional information in studies where the IND is held by SWOG. We try to make things as easy as possible. We don't require that you use an investigator brochure. Most of the INDs that we hold are for marketed products, just where they're being used in a different setting than their approval is marketed for. And so we try to include as much information in the protocol as we can, so you don't have to have a separate investigator brochure to support the performance of the study. And one weird exception to all of this is that in most cases, if the pharmaceutical management branch provides a drug to the sites, it's almost always an NCI-held IND. Lung map is the big exception. We have an agreement with the Pharmaceutical Management Branch in the NCI to provide the distribution for all of the drugs in lung map, but SWOG holds the IND for the study, the platform, and all of the sub-studies. SWOG policies and procedures. So I hope that all of you are familiar with the SWOG policy statements that are available on the SWOG website. The list that is on this slide, and there is an active link on the slide, so when you are able to access these, you'll be able to link from the slide to the policies themselves. There's clearly many more policies than are included on this slide, but the ones that are listed here are the ones that are particularly applicable to regulatory situations at individual sites. So there are some pieces that intersect with NCI requirements, things like maintaining rosters and some responsibility for patient follow-up. But there are others that really outline things that are very specific to SWOG. Some things like our institutional performance reviews, our affirmation of integrity is very specific to SWOG. And some of the details of how we collect and use specimens and the regulatory requirements related to the use of specimens are outlined in our specimen acquisition policy. So I do encourage you to use the resources that are available to you on the SWOG website. The policies can be very dense to read through, but I think if you just become familiar a bit with the table of contents for our policies page, you at least know where to go when you have a question if it relates to a SWOG study. On our best practices page, when is the turnover to QA? Which slide?
And several more.
Okay. We do have a best practices and quality assurance page on the website, and there's a lot of links there that I think can be very helpful to you in relation to preparing for SWOG quality assurance audits, the maintenance of master files, and kind of our guidance on investigational drug accountability. We also provide a best practices guidance document. I think Elaine's going to talk about that a little bit in more detail in a minute, but my main goal here is to let you know what resources are available to you and what kinds of information they include. And then we have several training courses and supporting resources.
Thanks, Dana. We actually just launched a new SWOG learning management system. It's called Expertise One. And there, like Dana said, there are tons of links and references on the next few slides. I'm going to go pretty quickly because we have a very full agenda today. So feel free to go back and download the slides and look at everything. And we will, I'm also available for questions at the open forum this afternoon. But the Expertise One learning management system has regulatory training as well as general clinical trials training accessible to SWOG members. As a reminder, our study-specific training or refresher is available through the CTSU class learning management system. So that's available through CTSU. There is also something that I want to announce today that will be an update over the next probably 6 months, continuously being updated. There is a new resources web worksheet available from our SWOG clinical research resources for oncology research professionals website. The link is there. Please go check it out. But it has just incredible list of resources. The CRA Workbench, I think most of you are familiar with, has resources from all sorts of things. For popular resources, they have the links to the internal SWOG QA information. For the external resources, links to CTEP and CTTAE for the internal CRA manual for oncology research professionals, and just really a wealth of information there. And the last thing that I wanted to mention is our clinical research resources website, which I just noted, has just an incredible wealth of external resources as well. Some of the regulatory specific ones are here. So if you have not already checked that out, please do so. So the 4 take-homes from today are the new LMS, the new resources onboarding list. We're in process of rolling out as much information as quickly as we can. And the 4th is that we really appreciate you and your dedication to ensure accurate and safe conduct of clinical trials. With that, I want to acknowledge the ORP Education Committee for all of their work, just incredible work putting this together. Introduce Elaine Armstrong, who is our former SWOG Quality Assurance Manager. She is retired. Congrats, Elaine. We have retained her as a QA consultant and are so thankful that she agreed to present today. With her is our new Quality Assurance Manager, Laura Gonzalez, and Maggie Spillert, who is our new Assistant Quality Assurance Manager.
White lights. You know, all these resources that Kara's talking about, we refer to these resources all the time too. It's especially when somebody says, well, where does it say that we do this? So we will dig in and go, okay, it's in the ORP manual or it's in best practices. And then sometimes we go, you know, that's not way, that's our expectation, but it's actually not, doesn't appear to be written anywhere. So then we know we have to update our resources to make them current with, you know, whatever the practices we're following. Okay. Yep. Oh, okay, it's not up to date. So we have an email, QA@swog.org. Everything used to come to me, and then we've been transitioning, knowing that I was going to be, you know, leaving. And at the point that I actually turned everything over to Laura, it's like, wow, instead of getting 200 emails a day, I'm getting 5. But these slides are based on what the majority of those questions that would come to us, you know, so that's how we, kind of the things I know we need to talk about. Okay, so first I want to talk about is long-term follow-up. There are some resources, chapter 10 of the ORP manual and the SWOG policy 30 that address this. For the regulatory requirements, you must keep studies open until they are added to the list of studies required with no required follow-up. That report is available on the CRA workbench. I know sometimes people say, well, we're not following any patients. Everyone is deceased, or they've finished their follow-up activities. Maybe they're lost to follow-up. But the statisticians, it's so important that they really want you to keep these studies open in case there is some reason to collect some additional data. I mean, you don't have to have the study open to, say, amend if there was an error made and there was a query and you just needed to amend data, but it's just a good practice to keep the studies open so that there's no question. We have had some situations where we've had to ask sites to go back and reopen a study in order to collect some additional information. So and if you're using the CIRB, it's not really any work on your part. And just whether you're using a local IRB or CIRB, if you're no longer following patients and a revision were to come out, then you don't need to process that. You don't need to, you know, process and update consent form. You don't need to do anything if it doesn't affect anything at your site. The one, you know, caveat would be, suppose there was a revision saying we need to collect additional data. Well, of course, then you'd have to process that. But just leave them open, and it's usually not a lot of work, you know, involved at your site. Of course, we do have S9808, which is our long-term follow-up protocol that's been in place for many, many years. And it was, there might be sites that had 20 studies in long-term follow-up, and this allowed them to make one submission per year instead of 20 submissions to their IRB. There's still, I forget, checked it a few weeks ago, was it 17 or 20? There's still about maybe 20 studies that potentially could be open at local IRBs. And so eventually, though, all those studies, when they're closed, this will go away, but it could be many more years. You could have patients and follow up on some of these studies at your local IRB for years to come. So it is a good resource. But if you have this, if you have studies open through the CIRB, someone contacted me because they wanted to switch the study over to S908. It's like, no. If it's open at your CIRB, just leave it with the CIRB. There's no reason to make a transition. So then a frequent thing that comes up is for patient transfers. Your regulatory requirements are that if you have patients on treatment that are transferring, you need to have a current IRB approval at the receiving site prior to that transfer, because you will need to immediately, start treating this patient. But when you have patients just in long-term follow-up, we don't require that the receiving site currently have IRB approvals. You can accept the transfers and move forward. This is really important in situations where you have a site that's closing down. Perhaps you have an investigator that's retiring and you're having to transfer all your patients, and it's maybe 20 patients and it's a lot of work to get those, you have to check, make sure all these studies are open with your, with an IRB to do the follow-up. But you may have patients that you won't need to see for 6 months or a year. So we will allow those transfers to take place, but you have to agree that you will get those studies open prior to conducting any research activities. And of course, it's really important that you look and make sure that you get a copy of the research record and medical records from the site that's transferring these patients, especially if they're on treatment, because once the transfer takes place, the receiving site is the one that will have to update, address queries, do the data entry. And if you don't have a copy of that record, and now there's a query from something that happened last year, and you don't have a copy of the records, then you're going to be reluctant to amend that data. But if you've got a copy of the records, you can see, oh yes, this is what needs to be done, then you can do that. So it's real important that you get make them provide you a copy of those records before you accept the transfer. The FDA does not require you to reconsent a patient at a time of transfer. They do require that you inform the patient of certain things like contacts for, say, the research, your PI, your IRB, but to simplify things, we just say, we make it a requirement that you reconsent the patient. So you should have them sign a new consent form and a HIPAA authorization at the new site so that they have agreed to release their records, and that you do have informed them who the contacts are that they need to know. Okay, we talked about that. So protocol deviations, this is something we get a lot of questions about. SWOG follows, we just decided now we're going to follow the CIRB guidance across the board. So whether you're using a local IRB or if you're using the CIRB, we want you to follow the guidance from CIRB. And that is that you have to report potential unanticipated problems and serious non-compliance. And they have, the CIRB website has great algorithms that you can follow to see if these are reportable. The local IRBs may want you to submit things that we don't consider reportable, and that's fine. You do need to follow your own CIRB's guidance, but if it doesn't meet the CIRB requirement, then you don't need to let us know. We want to know about the more major egregious type of deviations. And those types of deviations should always have a corrective action and corrective action plan. So when you submit that, sometimes you may want to submit it immediately with just to let us know, oh, we found this problem. But then I know the CIRB is going to want you to submit a CAPA, so you also should send that CAPA to us so we have a record of that. There's one thing on minor deviations that we don't want to know about, but at this point, but the CIRB there's a pilot project for reporting minor protocol deviations, and the study that's part of the pilot for us is S2012. When I checked last week, there's only 2 patients registered on that study, but and it's not official yet, the amendment or the revision to the study that is going to roll out this pilot project is at the NCI. So once that revision gets approved, you'll get notification that you'll have to report minor protocol deviations. From my perspective, I think this potentially could be a lot of work at your end, but that's what pilot projects are about. And hopefully the NCI will want to collect feedback from the sites, because, doing something from one study is one thing, but once you have, 50 studies active at your site, you're reporting minor protocol deviations. I don't know, could maybe kind of make you a little busy, so we'll see. So now the next thing we get lots and lots of questions about is, what types of assessments and procedures can be performed by outside facilities, instead of at the research site where you have CTEP investigators and CTEP research staff. And of course, COVID, telehealth visits, all of that has just magnified this issue, because now there's, and of course, with all the policies about COVID and allowing you to do alternate procedures, but most of those, as of I think about December, most of those will go away, and you're back to where we were. So this is a question, and we don't have all the answers yet, but we're moving in that direction. So some of the things that do that determine what we will allow are the investigator's handbook, where CTEP discourages the administration of standard of care treatment by local physicians unless the treating investigator maintains very careful surveillance. Then there are SWOG policies. SWOG policy 12 says patients must not be registered if they will not be seen at the institution reported as a treating institution. And there can be situations where we would allow something to be done at an outside institution, but you have to remember that you're still ultimately responsible. And if things are not done per study, per protocol, if you don't meet the regulatory requirements, you still are going to be, you may receive a deficiency, say, during an audit. And then SWOG policy 30 about follow-up is that once you have registered patients, then you're responsible for their follow-up. Some other things that affect this is the DTL requirements. So if it's an FDA registration study or a study with investigational agents, there are DTLs. There's a few of the older investigational studies that still don't have a DTL, but any new ones going forward will have a DTL. And so, of course, these tasks that are outlined on there that must be performed by a CTEP investigator or a CTEP staff then means that you can't do those assessments or any of those things at an outside facility. And of course, after the COVID provisions are retired, then that is going to, mark the end of certain things that could be done at other facilities. Of course, telehealth is a big thing today, and SWOG is working on updating some of our protocols to state in the protocol when telehealth visits. One of them is 1823, and a revision has been submitted to CTEP that will allow telehealth visits. This is especially going to be more prevalent in some of our cancer control studies. And if a patient is, if it's a treatment protocol where you have to have very close evaluation of adverse events, you're less likely to be able to do those types of studies. I mean, those assessments at an outside facility, but sometimes for cancer control studies, it'll be a little bit easier. So you have to remember that the registering and treating investigator is ultimately responsible for all patient care, protocol evaluations, and data collections. So if anything is going to be performed at an outside facility, you need to make sure that you can obtain the records, because you're going to need those records for a lot of reasons, for audits, to help you assess the patient, for patient care. So if you can't get those records, then you need to return all those activities to the registering site. I do remember an audit where a few years ago where a lot of procedures were being performed at an outside facility, and they did not have the records available at the audit. The data submission was very delinquent because they had not been able to obtain these records. And during the exit interview, the investigator basically admitted that they knew they had this problem ongoing for many, many months. And so as soon as they learned that they were not going to be able to get records, they should have brought all those, set everything back in-house, but they didn't. So they allowed things to continue at this facility for 6 months, and now they don't have the records. They don't even know what's going on with these patients. So definitely that audit didn't go well. So at this point, it's kind of a limited list, but just to make, kind of clear what is allowed to be performed at an outside facility. For pre-registration eligibility assessments, labs, scans, pathology, scans and pathology sometimes are obtained under standard of care conditions prior to you even consenting the patient. And so that's fine. You can use these results from outside facilities to determine eligibility of a patient. Then once a patient is on treatment or on some type of intervention, we still are okay if labs are obtained outside. Scans can be obtained at an outside facility, but scans oftentimes are used, or most of the time, for disease assessment. So the treating investigator is still responsible for reviewing those scan reports, assessing whether the patient has reached an endpoint. Is it time to take the patient off treatment? That's very critical. For some smaller sites, you may not have the facilities to provide radiation therapy or surgery. If it's a integral part of the study treatment, then most likely it will be required to be performed at a credentialed RT site, or maybe by a surgery has to be performed by a credentialed surgical site or surgeon. And of course, there's no exceptions to that. But sometimes if it's not an integral part of the intervention, and then it would be okay for that RT and surgery to be performed elsewhere, as long as it's not, a conflict with the protocol. Then, of course, with long-term follow-ups, once again, labs and scans is the same situation. Something that is new is history and physical assessments. If there is a DTL, the H&P must be performed by someone with a CTEP investigator or an APP that's registered with CTEP. But we also know that patients that are in long-term follow-up, oftentimes, if they have traveled a good distance to the site, just basically say, I'm not coming back in, and we really don't want to lose those patients. And so the NCI has agreed that in that case, a physical exam could be obtained by an outside physician, but as long as that information is shared, as long as the treating investigator or follow-up investigator, in this case not treating, but takes ultimate responsibility, they still have to review the data and sign off and make the final assessments on those patients. That's only in a situation where they're in long-term follow-up. When the alternative might be that the patient says, if I have to come into your facility, I'm just not going to do it. I just don't want to be on the study anymore. So that's will help with these patients. And I think now there's so much going on with telehealth visits and stuff that hopefully we'll be able to relax some of those standards going forward. One of the things Dana is doing, she has contacted the NCI on trying to get kind of like a working group among all the groups to make further decisions on some of this type of assessments and stuff, which I really think is a good idea, because everybody knows what it's like to have an audit by SWOG, and then have an audit by NRG, and then have an audit by Alliance. And we said it's okay, but Alliance says it's not okay, and NRG doesn't want you to do that, but we're like, oh yeah, that's fine. So anytime we can make things consistent among the groups, Laura and I actually have routine calls with the QA leads from the other groups, and we talk about a lot of this, and sometimes we don't agree, but a lot of times we do. We all come to agreement that we will, going forward, do things a certain way. So I think any of this that can be determined at the NCI level is a good thing, because then it brings consistency, and it makes it much easier for all of you if you know that we're all doing things the same way. So NCI had responded to Dana just last week, and hopefully after the meeting, they're gonna get some people together to start talking about, and it may be some things related to what can be done by telehealth visits or which types of assessments, things like that can be done at outside facilities. Oops. So the last thing I want to talk about is preparation for regulatory audits. At this point, I think just about everybody has had an audit of for protocols that were open through the CIRB. Up until a few years ago, somebody's going to go see if they can find out what that noise is. Up until a few years ago, there were sites that had not transitioned to the CIRB, but as of, I guess it was March of 2019, it was mandatory that all new studies be activated to the CIRB. Up until, when it's your first audit after transitioning to CIRB, it's a whole different experience with the kinds of documents that people want to see. In most cases, sites provide a lot of information that we don't need. In the past, if it was a large treatment audit where maybe we've got 30 protocols that we're reviewing, it might take 2 full days to do the review of all the regulatory documents for the audit, but then you switch to CIRB and we can look at all the same information in half a day. And so it makes it a lot easier, but we still want you just to give us what we need. So that includes the copy of the initial CIRB approval of the study-specific worksheet, and if there was any revisions to that form. We need documentation of when you implemented all the revisions at your site, because part of the requirements is we have to make sure that those were implemented within 30 days of distribution. It also lets us know, if there was a requirement to inform patients of new risks, then we need to know, when was that consent form implemented, so we know, did the patient need to sign that version when they were registered, or did they need to be reconsented? And then we also need to know about all versions of implemented consent forms. Oftentimes, sites will provide us just information on the consent forms that correlate to revisions, but you may have updated your consent form because you had a PI change, or maybe at your last audit, you were written up because there was some deficiencies in your consent form, so you made those corrections, so now you have a new version of the consent. We need to know about all the consent versions. It's also important, let's say you have a specific version of the consent form that's been updated because you have a new PI. It's still the same consent version. And if you have 2 different consent forms with the same exact, footer saying this is the protocol version, I don't know which is which. So you have to identify those, say, to show that it was amended on a certain date. You need to have a system that identifies that consent form is a same protocol version, but it's not, I need to be able to differentiate, and your staff needs to be able to differentiate. If it's a study with a DTL, we have access to the DTL information on the CTSU website. But prior to DTLs being implemented, SWOG has had a site authority log since 2003. Some sites are really surprised to hear that. And that, I think, is directly related to staff turnover. If you're new and somebody didn't happen to mention the site authority log to you during their training, then you don't know that there's such a form. But if you don't have a DTL, you need to have a site authority log. It's a paper form. We will accept a local version. Sometimes people have created a version that's very similar, and that's fine. But we only require one form for all studies. So, if your staff is participating on 50 protocols, you just need to fill out this form one time. It doesn't have to be protocol specific, although if you choose to do that, that's okay. And then if it's a registration study, you should have a copy of the trial master file. But the most important thing in preparing for the regulatory audit, if you're using the CIRB, is all the information we don't need. All those approvals, CIR approvals, they are on the CTSU website, and we have access to them just like you. In just the last couple of years, I've conducted audits where, it's the CIRB, and they provide me, this whole shelf of binders because, as somebody mentioned, there's 3/4 more of the paper that they've printed out. So first of all, there is no reason for at least for our needs, we don't need you to print all that information out. If you choose to print it out, fine, but don't give it to us during an audit. Some sites download all that information and file it electronically, and we don't need you to do that, but if you want to do that, it's fine. But please put them in folders that are separate from the information we need during an audit, because if I have to wade through, paper files or electronic files, and if 90% of what you've provided me is information I don't need, it just slows us down, and we're just looking for, that initial worksheet and the documentation of how you provide documentation of implementation dates. There's many ways to do that. You may have a copy of the email where you distributed that information to your staff. You may have a spreadsheet that you keep. There's different ways to do that, but that's all that we need to see. And then if you're using a local IRB, and like I say, there's not a lot of you still doing this, but there are some studies, some of our cancer control studies like SO820, was never open to the IRB. So we need we do need more information. We need your initial approval, your continuing annual reviews, approvals of all your protocol modifications. External safety reports have to be submitted to the IRB. Although some IRBs have a policy that says that only the safety reports that meet the criteria of unanticipated need to actually be submitted. And we have to look at 10%, verified 10% of those. And that stems from back in the days where, a study uses bevacizumab and you would have like literally, 10 feet of binders with all your safety reports. So fortunately, that's not the case in most cases now. Any internal SAEs that are unanticipated have to be submitted. And then once again, we just need to see copies of all versions of your consent forms. So that's pretty straightforward. And now I'm going to turn it over to Laura because she's going to talk about preparing for the audit for the patient case audit. And hopefully that will move over to you.
Thank you, Elaine. Okay. Thank you. Can y'all hear me? Okay. So from a regulatory standpoint in preparing for an audit for patient case, so we look at the informed consents that the patients have signed and any documentation of reconsent. So you need to make sure that you have that readily available. And it depends on what your SOP is at your site. Some sites file their informed consents and reconsents in their regulatory documentation, and some sites file it in their shadow chart. So however you do that, that's fine. We don't care. I mean, we care, obviously, but we don't have a preference. Just make sure that you let us know when we get to your site or when we're auditing remotely, that you tell us where we need to find that information so that we know where to look. And so also for reconsents or notification, we need to know where that is because we'll be looking at that during the audit. So if the patient has been notified of a revision, maybe it doesn't require a formal reconsent, then we need to find where that is. So that's important that we have that information. And then likewise with consent withdrawal, so if a patient withdraws their consent after registration, the institution needs to determine with the patient if they no longer wish to be treated per protocol, if they wish to no longer be followed per protocol, or both, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean if a patient withdraws consent that they're also withdrawing their consent to be followed. So you need to make sure that you document that determination. So QA recommends that you have some sort of a consent withdrawal document that delineates the patient their patient's wishes. The document should be signed, dated, and kept in the medical record and available for auditor review. We don't have a document, SWOG doesn't have a document. So whatever you have, or, or if you draw it up, just make sure that you have that. We have some resources that we can provide that we have shamelessly stolen from sites that we're happy to share with you. I say stolen. They have been given to us, but SWOG doesn't write things like that, but we'll share it if you don't have anything. And so when you have gotten that consent withdrawal, make sure that you know what that looks like and that what the patient's wishes are, because data has to be submitted for patients who have consented to follow up. So you need to refer to protocol sections 7, 9, and 14 to determine what needs to be submitted, okay? And so talking about the delegation of task log that Elaine referred to and that I talked about a little bit. So for FDA registration studies and for studies that utilize investigational agents, you have to have a DTL. So as auditors are prepping for the audit, we will review the DTL on the CTSU website to make sure that it's active. And then during the audit, we will spot check the DTL to make sure that the staff member who's consented the patient or who's performed the H&P or who's the treating investigator or who's doing endpoint assessments, that they are on the DTL and that is a task that they've been assigned. And so it's not quite the same as the old site authority law where we would check a signature and we could then look in your chart and see, does that chicken scratch match the chicken scratch on the site authority log? But we look at that DTL. So we just want to make sure that it matches and that person is the one to perform the task. I had an auditor recently who went through one of the registration study audits, and the treating investigator that was taking care of the patient was not on the DTL. So just make sure as you're going through that your DTL matches who's taking care of your patients. It doesn't happen very often, but as we found out with that patient, it does happen occasionally.
So Laura, I don't want to steal your thunder, but we have a lot to cover.
I'm done. handing it over to Maggie now.
But we actually need to move on to our next section. So any questions you guys have about audit, we have open forums. These brilliant women will be here and they are a wealth of knowledge. So please bring your questions. Sorry to cut you guys short, but we just want to make sure that we get a chance for other panelists to come up. We were like 5 minutes over already. Sorry, Maggie.
Sorry.
Maggie, we are going to call on you in open forum, so be ready.
Okay. All right.
All right, so my name is Amy Kuffernis. I am with the Crown Consortium, so we're going to move on to another panel discussion. So if my panelists are here, if they're able to come up. I work with the Crown Consortium. I serve as a research administrator, so I've been doing research for 15 years in various realms, anything from coordinator to regulatory to this role. And my fun fact is I have chickens and they are the best pets ever. And you get free eggs, kind of, but not really, but they're still fun. So challenges, you guys know them. We all have them. They're big, they're small. They affect you at work, they affect you at home. They don't go away, but that's what makes us who we are. One thing with the challenges is the solution's not always the same. Problem that maybe you had 5 years ago, and if you're presented with the same problem today, you might solve differently based on experience, based on how your thought process works. There's lots of different ways to approach these challenges. One thing that we all know is one size does not fit all. The solution at site A may not be the same solution for site B. So we have a great group of panelists here who come from a variety of different sites. We have talked a lot about the different swim lanes that are present. And when I first started research, I thought everybody here was NCORE. I did not realize there were other people besides NCOREs. So it's been great to understand this and know that while they may be doing some of the pieces the same, there might be different responsibilities, different layers and complexities that they have that they need to report to. So I serve as a point of contact within our consortium. We have 3 healthcare organizations underneath that, and I just help facilitate and herd the cats. But the other people here, they do a lot with regulatory work. So I have Jess and I have Caitlin and I have, oh my goodness, Rachel, sorry. So I'm gonna let them do their quick introduction. We'll start with Caitlin.
Hey everyone. Hi, so I'm from Rocky Mountain Regional VA just outside of Denver, and we have historically been a LAPS affiliate with our adjacent university, but in the last few years, as I was on board, we became a main member site. So it's a little bit convoluted because we still work with a lot of our university partners and trying to kind of bridge the gap. So we have around 25 active trials, I'd say, growing and changing all the time, and getting some more ideas here at SWOG, which is pretty exciting. And I've got 8 years of experience. I started in the cardiology realm at the bench and kind of found my way into clinical research. And I really kind of have a convoluted path to this career, as maybe others do too, but my fun fact is that I actually have a first career in marine biology, and yes, I spent time studying whales and seals. So my swim lane is, again, in the main member profile here.
All right, Rachel?
Thanks. So I'm Rachel Kitchen. I'm the Senior Regulatory Affairs Coordinator for UC Davis Comprehensive Cancer Center's CCN, which is Cancer Care Network. We are a LAPS main member with affiliate and integrated component sites. We are the signatory institution with 3 relying institutions, and we have 4 affiliates within our network. We typically manage about 40 different trials for the network. I personally have 11 years in oncology research. I started out as a research coordinator and then data, and now I'm working in regulatory, so I kind of have the fun combination of history. And then I do live in Montana, and I am a wildlife photographer, mostly elk and moose. So, yeah. My membership swim lane, we are under the LAPS grant. And if you aren't familiar with that, there is a signatory institution responsible for reporting to SERB and quality oversight. And then there is the affiliated sites, which actually have their own FWA, but still use the same boilerplate language and report back to the signatory institution. And then we also have the integrated component sites, which fall mostly under the signatory institution, and they're monitored by the same office. Just to give you a little background.
And Jess.
Hi, my name is Jessica. I am part of our NCORP site, Crown, and I am located up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, so not too far from here. And we have 3 unique NCI CRB signatories that create our Crown, so we all work a little bit separately, but together at the same time. We have 29 affiliates across the whole consortium, and that does include satellites. We have a lot of CRAs that work remotely at our sites, so a lot of different complexities with everything we have. Right now, we do have 226 active clinical trials. I have been in cancer research for about 5 years now. I started in device research, was able to get into oncology as a CRA, and have been in regulatory for almost 2 years now. My fun fact is I have 4 kids with a total of 12 legs. So I have 2 dogs that for the longest time, all my coworkers thought I was talking about my non-furry children that did not exist. So my 2 dogs are very much my kids, along with the 2 that are now a part of the family. And then my swim lane is a NCORP affiliate, so along with Amy, pretty much until this meeting, I didn't realize how complex all of our different memberships were. So it's really exciting to hear how we can all do the same work so differently.
So unlike the other forums, we're going to ask one question, then I'm going to have each of the panelists kind of go down. We're going to start with Caitlin and go to Rachel and Jess, and then we're each going to take turns asking. So our first question is, what is your biggest regulatory challenge being a multi-institutional or having multiple organizations that you have to work with?
So we have a lot of people trying to learn at our VA site how to manage lots of different types of IRBs, and just learning how to ask the questions and who to ask questions of and who to defer to, kind of that package of questions is really the hardest thing for us. And being the person who is willing to say, I have no idea what I'm doing, can someone please lead the way so I can create an SOP and help the next person down the line?
With our network, it seems to be the communication factor because, as we all know, some people are very comfortable with email, phone, text, Teams. We even have a site that really is still using pagers. So we definitely try to embrace the communication factor. And as my supervisor, Ashley Tyden, mentioned, we do try to communicate by more than just the email. So if there are regulatory updates, we also have meetings with each individual site that includes the CRC, myself as a regulatory coordinator, supervisor, and then a quality assurance person who will meet with the CRCs to discuss any updates, site topics, data expectations to make sure that those are thoroughly communicated and there's not any surprises come audit time.
I think one of our biggest challenges that we have is when we try to talk about what studies to open up next, that we might have different sites that are interested in different studies, different PIs that are interested. So when we talk about ever trying to have like a central regulatory, it's really hard since we all have such different wants and needs. So trying to work towards maybe one day having a central regulatory would be amazing. Otherwise, with our 3 main sites, everyone has to do their own regulatory. But we do meet monthly to talk about our different studies. And so we can learn from one another. And while you've been opening a study, what have you found? What barriers, what challenges? Once a study has been open, to try to communicate what is working really well and try to make cheat sheets to share with each other, and doing a lot of Teams chat and emailing to always have an open line of communication.
So you guys did a really good job answering that question. You kind of answered this one already too. So we're just gonna, this one asks like specific guidelines, operations, and communication plans, and you guys kind of looped that right in. So we're trying to make up a little bit of time and we'll keep plugging along. What is one mistake that you've learned, or one mistake you have made and learned from to improve your department? We all have got dirty laundry. No one likes to show it, but we have to be able to share our dirty laundry if we want to learn from each other. So I'm hoping you guys are willing to share some dirty laundry.
So I think a really common mistake that we see within the oncology group is, again, not knowing exactly who to talk to. We're still working generally within our research department on developing SOPs. And so I think the biggest mistake we've made is being siloed in the oncology realm and not always being aware or open to all the other research that's going on within our facility and how that informs our work. And we need to kind of work together to create appropriate SOPs that suit all the types of research that are happening in an organization. So I think without having the broader perspective and that openness to have conversations outside just our wheelhouse, it makes what we do harder because other groups have solutions. Other groups, especially within a really big hospital like VA and system where there's differences happening across VA sites or within departments that we might utilize, other people have solutions to hard problems, and being able to kind of look up from where I'm at and say, hey, cardiology, do you actually know how to handle this imaging issue that we're having? They may have the point of contact. They may have an SOP, rather than me spending time reinventing the wheel. So I don't know if that's really dirty laundry, but I think it's just best practices in that a lot of people have come before our group and we can learn a lot from them, and it can help bridge gaps down the line as research becomes more integrative. Being able to have those relationships is really, really important.
I'm relatively new to regulatory, and I found that in my training, I just expected everything to be chronological, that I would follow these steps in opening a study. But the biggest frustration in opening studies for everyone is that they take time. And so I've realized that a lot of things can be done simultaneously, and the more that we can focus on trying to do, approach it that way, and not just sitting around waiting for the PIs to sign off on documents, which we know sometimes can take a little bit. If we can expedite the other things so that we're just ready to submit to IRB as soon as possible, it makes a big difference.
So I have real dirty laundry. When I was opening my very first study as a regulatory specialist, I knew that we compare our NCA
with the funding sheet, with the consent, with the protocol at our site to make sure everything matches. I didn't spend enough time doing this, and the study I was working on required bone marrow biopsies and aspirates, and everything didn't jive right. I realized this after I requested IRB approval. This was over a year ago, and the study still is not completely open at our site. But because I requested IRB approval, I still have to keep up with continuing reviews and amendments. So I went ahead and made more work for myself rather than doing the work up front to really compare all of the details. And now that I did that once, I spent a lot of time combing through the NCAs and the funding sheet and the consent to make sure everything up front makes sense before I go ahead and request for approval.
That's a good example. Yes, thank you. So I'm just gonna throw one in there, and I've got dirty laundry too. I know there's a lot of new people out there, and I wanna make them all feel welcome, but how many of you guys have the honor of saying you've enrolled in an eligible patient? So, I mean, we don't like it, it happens. The big thing is you just continue to learn from it. So speed answers quick for our last question. Why do you think knowledge about these topics are important? We've just spent 2.5 hours talking about pretty much all regulatory when we do a lot of enrolling of patients. But why is this so important? Why in your realm?
If you understand what's going on with regulatory, you can work with the group and create less work, better work for everyone.
And like I said, I was a research coordinator before, and all of the roles are so intertwined, and understanding that we're all trying to work towards the same goal. I know we've mentioned it several times in this meeting, but it really does come down to teamwork.
I know one of my big takeaways is to understand the time that goes into regulatory. I was a CRA before I stepped into this role, and I used to ask our regulatory specialists of, hey, can you get this study open next week? And they're like, is the patient interested? I'm like, no, I want to present it. I didn't fully understand the time that it takes to open, to maintain, that there's so many checks and balances before you just go ahead and open up a study for fun. So just to really understand the time that goes into regulatory.
So I want to thank all of our panelists, and I want to thank all of you guys for staying awake. It's been a long time that we've been in here. Bueller, is everyone still awake? We're in Chicago, I had to do it. So again, thank you all for everything that you do. One quote I just kind of want to leave us with is, when it comes to all these different challenges, is just remember that smooth seas do not make for skillful sailors. I'm going to turn it back over to Joyce, who's going to wrap things up for us.
Speed dating. Amy, you win the prize for speed dating there. I'm gonna win this prize for the lightning round, okay? So hang with me, and we're gonna say goodbye, good luck, and we'll see you this afternoon. This slide speaks for itself. We've all talked about change, and I think it's important to recognize, whether we like it or not, it's here. It certainly has been for the last few years. This is a timeline, but this is what it actually looks like. This is what you all have been through for the last few years. And if you think about it, the accelerated pace of change over the last 20 years has been enormous. Okay, you have made CTSU happen, CIRB happen, Open happen, the NCTNs coming together, ETCTN forming, RUMS, now IDME, PMB, Aurora. You operationalize this, you make this possible. It's amazing. We've certainly survived the pandemic. Whether you have come and emerged completely out of it yet, we are in the next phase, whatever that happens to be. And you have made remote consenting possible. We have shipped oral investigational agents. We have remote audited. We have done some pretty fantastic things. And now we're moving into expanding practice for APPs. There's a lot of successes here. That's my major message to you today, to remember that. We've gone through IDME, and I'm going to flip through these slides relatively quickly, but understand that two very lovely people, Benjamin Picarata, and I apologize if I've mispronounced his name, and Jeremy Haynes are joining us this afternoon, and they are from the contractor whose CTSU and Westat have arranged to provide this service. They're happy to answer any of your questions. That's all they'll be there for. They will be in the Know Your IRB session. Again, these are their slides. These will be available on the SWOG website as a posting. For those of you who have not done this before, I checked with some of our physicians, and this is something they've been doing for NIH grants for a few years. I can tell you as a nurse who has licensure in 3 states, I had to do it several years ago. You know, if you can get comfortable with your bank, and I do recognize that has some reservations these days, but if you can get comfortable with your bank doing 2-factor ID, this is exactly the same thing. And again, the services use bank-grade encryption. I think it's important to understand you're not just sharing your information with the guy who texts you and says, I'm from Amazon and your account has been locked, okay? This is a little bit different than that. And I know, I seem to get those all the time these days. Anyway, there are some Bill of Rights issues. There is privacy with this. Like I said, I did this 2 years ago. It is survivable, and you have some measure of control over it. This slide again speaks for itself. These slides will be available for your review, and again, a closer look this afternoon at the Know Your IRB session. And I apologize for skimming through these, but we are trying to get you out the door on time. Okay, so this gives you a little bit of ideas about what you have to have in order to complete your ID.me. As Matt said last night at the site operations meeting, if you're new to CTEP and you're registering for an IAM account, you will bump right up against this really quickly and need to complete it. So I am trusting you to speed read too. Sorry about that. You know, I think it's important to understand that we have people doing research all over the world. SWOG has been a pioneer in that effort, and we have to ensure in a very interesting society that we keep the information of our human research subjects saved, protected, and always observed. And so I think this is the government's way of ensuring that that happens, and I can only applaud that. There are helpful tips and tricks on this. There are also the same links that Matt has spoken about. So I will ask that you look through these slides, and I'm happy to share them and happy to have follow-up questions this afternoon. So this is just a quick reminder that it's here. There are a lot of things that have changed in our lives over the last few years, and the change and the future are here now. E-reg systems, you've heard them people remark on, Florence, Complion, Viva, some homegrown systems, shared documents, remote auditing, shared investigator platforms. All of these are things that we are dealing with right now in the operations aspect, particularly in regulatory. This is something to look forward to. NCARTS is a project of NCU, the corporation. It is being tried in 3 pilot sites at this moment in time, and it is a direct data connect. You'll hear more about it in the spring meeting, and it helps to flow information from the institutional medical record to a honest broker essentially in the middle, and then to the SWOG metadata database. And the good news about that is that you lose a lot of problems with data degradation because of copying errors, okay? So you'll hear more about this, but this is the future coming to us right now. I think the other thing, I spoke with Andrea Denikoff and Grace Mishkin, and they are looking at, with 2 particular trials, combo match and myelo match, the idea of doing a worksheet that would be for your standard order set. So if you have Cerner or Epic, you are often involved in some form of an EMR order set. And so they're trying to help with that in the same way that they've helped with national coverage analyses, in making sure that those templates are available to everyone and jump-starting our work. There are also some really strong efforts going on, and this was supplied complete with references by Andrea, to broaden eligibility, recognizing some issues that were discussed earlier in the day and late last night. There are still a lot of eligibility snafus, a lot of requirements and needs that need to be met, and so there is a lot of work being done around this area in the background. It is, as it notes in the 3rd bullet, very much in partnership with ASCO. So I'm going to leave you to read this slide, but if you actually pull the main messages out of it, Heraclitus is the originator of the initial quote that was on the first slide. This is a man who was born to a wealthy family, renounced all of his wealth, went up to the mountains, and watched the world essentially go by. And he determined that nature's in a constant state of flux. There is constant change. Everything is like a river, it's flowing ever onward. And the message I really want you to walk out of here today is this. As oncology research professionals, you have operationalized many initiatives. So keep the first slides in this presentation uppermost in your mind as you face a future with, unfortunately, more change, okay? Remember this, though, and be proud. You've made a difference in people's lives. Sometimes, particularly when we're in a regulatory or data area, we forget because we don't see a patient. You ever forget? Just ask to go along with the coordinator. Each one of our patients has a face, a name, a story, and we change that story for them. Don't ever forget that and remember it. Many of us owe our careers to the support and the actions that the people in this room do. Many of the investigators that you're going to listen to in the subsequent days of this SWOG meeting, they owe their careers to us. We can make or break in many ways the success of a trial that they work on. We help them be successful. Remember that. Be very proud. We have an obligation to pass along our work to others, and much of this is focused in that area. We want to make sure that you understand it's an each one teach one system in so many ways, and we want you to accept that responsibility and be very proud of the part you play in everyone's career. And remember that we all have bad days, you know, they just happen. That's why we support each other, that's why we work as a team, and that's why we always remember everything that we accomplish. So, you know, if you ever forget, reach out to any of the people that you've listened to today. They will be happy to remind you how important you are, how valued your work is, and how big of a success you have been. And we're going to send you out the door with a reminder to complete those evaluations. Tell us what you want to see next time, and be sure and tell us, you know, anything you think we need to know about doing this better. We appreciate your attendance very much today.